that affects my day-to-day journalistic life as the Asia editor of the Financial Times, and then to talk a little bit about how, as media, we can cover that story best, where we need to be, what are the issues that we need to bear in mind to do good coverage of the Taiwan-China-US geopolitical story. But let's start with something very, very simple. We've heard constant talk about war across the Taiwan Strait. That's been the topic of the news for the last couple of years, and I think it's grown in urgency with what's happened in Ukraine. But what I'd like to ask you all is that really true? Is that something we really should be worrying about? Should we actually be concerned about the risk of a war across the Straits? Professor Shin, maybe I come to you first. Right.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone from the audience, and Robin, Professor Wu, and Professor Wang. First of all, my honor to be invited here to share my thoughts and to discuss with all of you here. Okay, so that's a really very tough question. Is there really going to be a war? Are we going to be involved in some kind of threatening, military threatening? All those kind of topic actually has been very much talked about. And I remember there was one day I just switched on my computer and received email from a friend far away in Estonia, and with very short message. He just simply dropped me some lines and asked me, Charlene, it's really that worse there in Taiwan. Are you okay? You know, I think this kind of messages just occur repeatedly during the last, especially 1 year. So, is there really going to be a war? You know, my answer might be a little bit disappointing to you because who knows? There is only one person who really have the answer. And who that be? That's God. Only God knows. You know, in terms of rationality, I believed that none of us really wants a war. You know, a war broken up here in Taiwan will really be a great disruption to not only global economy, but also global order as well. Just simply thinking about not a war, but thinking about blockades. Take Chinese blockade over the island of Taiwan, for example. If that happened, then immediately it will cost at least $2 trillion to global economy immediately. And the effect will be non-reversible. So let's just simply talking about blockade. And now we are thinking about a war. So if we think about the possibility of war, or if anyone want to engage in a war, then rationality will tell us, no, none of them. I believe neither Biden, neither Xi Jinping, neither Tsai Ing-wen, none of them, and including every citizen here in Taiwan would really wanted a war. But, contingency actually is not that predictable. And no one knows what will really happen along the way. Will there be one day like when China conducted its military exercise or the drills, then there might be some collusion between, say, the Chinese airplane collide into American, warship or whatsoever. So nobody actually can tell with that. I will stop here, then continue later.
So there's a risk of accident. I think when you said God there, the audience was expecting you to say someone else, but you went for God. Professor Wu, let me come to you. Is there really any chance that Taiwan could be the next Ukraine? Is this a realistic scenario?
In a sense, I think it is. And the reason is, I think when we are talking about the risk of war, we can break it down to 3 dimensions. And I'm going to focus on the calculations of the policymakers in Beijing, because I think they are the ones who will have the only ones who, with the potential to launch a war against Taiwan. three dimensions. The first one is the intention or values, and it is in inverse relationship to the possibility of peaceful unification. That is, when the possibility of peaceful unification is down to zero, for example, with Taiwan declaring independence, then the incentive for Beijing to launch a military attack on Taiwan would rise dramatically. So this is the first one, the intention. The second one is the capabilities, whether the PLA has the ability to militarily attack Taiwan and properly to defeat anyone who tries to come to rescue, for example, the United States and Japan. And the third one is cost, whether the PRC will be able to bear the costs of such military activities. We can always see from what the West has done to impose economic sanctions on Russia, to know what kind of economic sanctions that might be imposed on the PRC if push comes to shove. So if we have peaceful unification possibilities down to zero, if we have military balance of power favoring the People's Liberation Army, if we have the cost of military attack considered bearable, then the risk of war is rising. Now, I think this is very interesting because you have three dimensions. So by emphasizing different dimensions, you will come up with different risk predictions. And the high American military and intelligence officials in the past have been talking a lot about there might be imminent attack by the PLA on Taiwan. But after the Biden-Xi meeting in Bali, I think they have been playing down the possibilities by shifting away from military balance and to other dimensions, basically saying, even though the military dimension is tilting towards the PLA side, but if we take a look at the intention and so on and so forth, we don't have concrete evidence that they are going to strike. So because you have three dimensions in the risk calculus, by shifting your emphasis, you can come up with different predictions that fit your current policy agenda. And I think the current policy agenda of the United States is to play down the war risk with the PLA. And that, I think, has a lot to do with the U.S. has already passed the midterm election. So domestic politics matters.
Okay, so intention, capability, and cost. Jiang Wei, what's your assessment of those factors?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I think over the past few years, I have been in the minority who believes that it's very unlikely that there will be a war over the Taiwan Straits. I mean, if you, over the past 2 years, the U.S., the generals in the U.S., UK, and Australia have made dire predictions that China would most likely to invade Taiwan in 2027 or 2030. But where are the evidence? There was no evidence. I mean, they're all saying that. And then now we're all in Taiwan. Can you tell me when was the last time you have heard generals in Taiwan making a prediction that China is going to invade Taiwan in 2027? I think lots of people are talking about this 2027 because 2027 is the centenary anniversary of the founding of the PLA, the Chinese Armed Forces, and it's also the fourth term that if Xi Jinping wants to seek re-election. I think right now there is a very dangerous assumption that Xi Jinping is going to order the Chinese armed forces to invade Taiwan before his term expires. And as far as I understand, that he's probably going to be ruling China for some years to come. So I don't think any invasion of Taiwan is imminent or in the next few years. I think I echo what Professor Wu said earlier, that I think the recent visits by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Beijing, and also the recent moves by U.S. and China to put a floor under the spiraling relationship is not going to stabilize the relationship between China and the U.S. Is also going to be is also going to cool down tensions over Taiwan, and I think that again, I'm in this minority, but I don't rule out the possibility that now this is a very good window of opportunity for China and the U.S. As Professor Wu mentioned earlier, that the U.S. midterm election is over, and Xi Jinping has secured his third term, and China has reopened. And before the U.S. presidential election get more intense next year, and before the election in Taiwan at the beginning of next year, I think this is a very good opportunity for both sides to talk. And I don't rule out the possibility that Beijing and Washington will reach a new understanding over Taiwan. About this, I would like to just use 1 or 2 minutes to talk about this. I mean, there is this background that, China and the U.S., the Chinese mainland and the U.S. re-established bilateral ties in 1979. And since 1979 until 2016, when Donald Trump came to power, I think there was basically an understanding between Beijing and Washington over Taiwan. I mean, you could say that in 1995, 1996, there was a Strait crisis, but mostly there was an understanding that that Beijing, every time Chinese officials, Chinese leaders and U.S. leaders met, every time the Chinese and U.S. will highlight this one China principle or one China policy. But in fact, from 1979 to 2016, largely, the Taiwan issue was always on the lip of Chinese officials. But in fact, it was not really a major issue because both sides had an understanding that China will insist on one China policy, and the U.S. said we respected we acknowledge the one China policy, and then U.S. will continue to sell weapons to Taiwan, and then China will go through the motions of protesting, and then things just went on as usual.
Do you think it can go back to how it was? It seems like it's changed fundamentally. Do you think it can go back to that?
Yes, and then that's what I'm trying to say, and then sort of my understanding is that starting from 2016. After Donald Trump came to power, his people, his China policy wonks, started to play the Taiwan card. And then, everything changed. I mean, you could say, if you read the overseas media, the international media, you could say that both sides, right now, both sides are blaming each other for inflaming the situation. But I think, if from where I sit, I believe that the Trump administration started to play the Taiwan card. And then you could say over the past 5 or 6 years, both sides have been testing each other's bottom line over Taiwan. And now I believe that, with the recent warm-up in bilateral relations, and then both sides are now sort of want to sit down and talk about things.
So they've been testing each other's bottom lines. It's more rhetorical than real. They can come to some sort of accord in this political quiet period, is basically your view.
No, I mean, I think, over the past few years.
Yes or no, because I want to move on. Professor Wu, do you agree with that? Do you think that this is more rhetorical than real? Do you think there is a political opportunity now for the US and China to at least come to some better way of living with each other?
Well, I think we have to take a look at the international environment and also domestic politics. In terms of international environment, the situation of a cordial relationship between the United States and PRC, I think, has been declining. And the reason is because of the so-called Thucydides trap or power transition. Namely, you have China challenging America's hegemonic position, and the US doesn't like to be challenged. In the past, Xi Jinping says that the Pacific Ocean is wide enough for both China and the United States to navigate freely. Nowadays, Xi Jinping is saying that the world is wide enough for the two countries to move freely. From American years, that means that China's ambition has grown from competing with the United States in the Pacific Ocean to the whole world. So this is only natural with the rising power of the PRC. I think the two are in a very tense relationship. Whether that would result in a war, it really depends on whether the political elite can handle it. And that's when the domestic politics fit in. And I think domestic politics offer us a window of opportunity right now because Xi Jinping has already got his third term and US has passed its midterm election. And so the two sides can deal with each other in a more matter-of-fact, give and take manner. They don't have to be that much worried about domestic critics. But then very soon we are going to move into the electoral season, 2024 US presidential election. And by the way, Taiwan will have presidential election too. And so domestic politics would at that time work against stability and certainty. So the international system remains tense. Domestic politics may offer a window of opportunities or would aggravate the tension inherent in the international system. That's my observation.
Xin, maybe I can ask you about how all this looks from Taiwan. And also, Taiwan has an election next year. But for the Taiwanese people, suddenly you've got the world's two superpowers talking about you as being their battleground almost. You've got a room full of the world's media here. How do you think the Taiwanese people interpret this? And how will that play out in Taiwan's election next year?
Okay. I assume that most of you have already known that Taiwan is a very divided society. It's difficult to cover the whole spectrum of people's opinion, but we can generally maybe divide it into two big groups. I hate to use pan blue or pan green, but still, that's a lazy but convenient way to just describe people's opinion here in Taiwan society. So, like for example, there are some people here in Taiwan, they may share more of the American perspectives towards China and regarded that the whole tension and the whole conflict issue was actually caused by Chinese assertiveness and intensified military build-up here around Taiwan. And so, so basically, like most of that they are DPP supporters, and so for them, a war, if that's avoidable, then they may be prepared to just fight for it. Of course, peace is still the best option, and still there are a big group of people here in Taiwan. They share more. They are more in line of the Chinese opinion toward the whole situation, and tend to regard that the problem, the whole geopolitical tension, actually was caused by Taiwan's resistance to talk with China and the increasing independence movement, as well as also along with international support from the Americans especially, because China was very sensitive about international meddling here in the domestic Taiwan issue. which was regarded as international intervention in the Chinese affairs, domestic affairs. So back to the question. So our election, the election result next year, as Professor Wang and Professor Wu has repeatedly emphasized, it could be a very, very precious opinion window, opportunity window for the whole situation to just de-escalate. On the other hand, it could also be another catalyst to the second round of tension, depending on how our domestic politics dialogue during the next 6 months. So for most of our journalists and friends here, you may just keep an eye on all the election, the campaign, and what kind of topic and how we are going to talk about the issue. Yeah.
So it's how Taiwan's own debate about its future comes out will affect China's.
Yeah, I think we still share the common view that people really will try to, pursue peace. If peace is approachable, then I think it's still more preferable, of course. But some of the citizens, some of the public opinions, they will tend to emphasize, highlight the necessity of self-defense or even engaging in a war if it's necessary. So it's very, very diverse, divided society here, and very, very hard to just generate a simple conclusion and under the label of Taiwan and say that's the Taiwanese people's opinion on the topic. No, I think it will be very, very hard for us to generate such kind of conclusion.
I think that's probably an important message for all the journalists in the room. It is not to make lazy generalizations, which I know we all try not to do, but Taiwan, like everywhere else, has its own political divisions on this issue. There's so many more questions I could ask about the substance. I want to make sure we have time for Q&A at the end, because I see already some people itching to ask questions. But I want to first just talk about how we, as the media, can cover this story well. So perhaps let's start with you, Jiang Wei, and come this way. How can we, particularly the international media, cover this story properly?
Thank you. It's a very interesting question. You see, I've been a journalist for the past 30 years, reporting and writing on China. And over the past few months, I gave interview to several foreign publications, and it happens the journalists who talk to me over the phone, they're all based in Taiwan. I think Joe Kahn was here at the New York Times, also moved some of its editorial operations to Taipei and in Seoul. There seemed to be a kind of assumption that Taiwan is a safer place to be. But I think, as a journalist, I believe that where you report on China is very important, not because I'm from Hong Kong, so I will say the benefits of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is, to me, Hong Kong is still very much the place to report about China, even with this national security law, even with this riots in 2019. I mean, when I was a journalist more than 30 years ago, I was fascinated by all those war correspondence stories, the journalists seeking adventures, dangerous assignments, and all that. But now all I heard is the foreign journalists are decamping Hong Kong and moving to Seoul or Singapore or Taiwan to cover China. And the second point I want to make is just purely talking from my own experiences about how you can do a better job of covering China. Is that, right now I started a teaching job at the Hong Kong Baptist University. I'm now teaching journalism starting from this January. And this is what I have told my students. And I want to share with you as well. It also applies to you guys, is that when you are based in outside China, and when you want to report about China, you got to remember there was 3 Chinas. That the first China is being portrayed on the official media. That is that the Chinese leaders are busy, the Chinese people are happy, and the rest of the world live in misery. And the second China is the China that you guys most likely to come across and research and study. That's through the internet. And like the internet in the rest of the world, the internet is controlled by the people who have the loudest voices or who have the strongest feelings, who are the trolls. So if you go through China's internet, which is being heavily censored by the censors, you will see that when we are talking about Taiwan, and then you will read so many reports, very sort of strong words about supporting, urging the Chinese government to use military means to take over Taiwan. But those people do not represent the majority or the other people whose views are not reflected on the internet. So that's the second part, that's the second China. If you only stay outside China and want to know more about China, that's the first and second China. So the third China is that you have to be in China. If you cannot, right now the Chinese government is very strict over issuing visas, and I think Hong Kong is the second best place. And if you happen to be in China, you need not only stay in the big cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, you got to go to the medium sizes and the small places and the rural areas, and you will see the majority of the Chinese people, they don't support, I cannot say majority, but I say lots of people, they don't support Russia's invasion of Ukraine. They don't want a war over Taiwan. Why do we want to invade Taiwan? I guess that's the point I want to make.
Okay. There's many interesting things we could say about that. The Financial Times still has its editorial base in Hong Kong. There are obviously questions about Hong Kong's future as a media location. And we, like the New York Times, would love to be allowed to send more journalists to China. So anyone's listening out there, please give us our China visas and we'll go and report accurately on the feelings of the Chinese people. Professor Wu, what would your advice be to the media on how we should cover the Taiwan, China, US story?
I know nowadays Taiwan is considered to be a battleground for the two great powers to compete for influence. And so Taiwan is kind of instrumentalized, considered to be a prize, a position to be taken, like in a war. But Taiwan is a country. This is the 20th largest economy in the world. Its economic competitiveness is ranked 6th in the world. It is producing semiconductors, most sophisticated ones. And its people, the people will suffer the most if Taiwan is turned into a battleground. So I think for anyone who is really trying to report in depth the situation in Taiwan and whether there would be a war, should have the mentality of Taiwan centrality. This is the place where you have to dig deep. And as Professor Xin just mentioned, I have talked about the three dimensions of the risk of war. I think the blue camp is concentrating on the intention part. They think we need to dialogue with mainland China, telling them that there's no intention of permanently separating Taiwan from the mainland. There's no reason for launching a war. But then for those in the green camp, they may think that military deterrence is the most effective way of reducing the war risk. So they emphasize different aspects of the war risk. They all want to bring it down, but they emphasize different aspects. And this is the nuances of Taiwan. So for any reporter coming from anywhere in the world, to try to go deep into Taiwan psychology and our attitude and whether there will be a war in Taiwan, I think need to take a look at this difference.
Just to be clear, for anyone who doesn't know, the blue camp is the KMT and the green camp is the DPP.
Yeah, basically.
Okay, thank you. Professor Shin, any advice? You're a former foreign correspondent. What would be your advice for us foreign correspondents in Asia?
Okay. Actually, I have been waiting for this question for long because that's one of the main purposes why I think I should be here. Some of the thoughts I would like to share with the audience here is, I always feel like there are a lot of things, a big role journalism can play in a situation. At the beginning, I said, only God knows if there is going to be a war here. But it's up to our human beings to work out what we wanted. So if we want peace, then let's work toward peace. If we expect war, well, that's more exciting for journalism, right? But if we really want war, then our discourse will just lead us toward that way. So journalism actually is a very important stakeholder in the issue of the geopolitics and the future possibility of Taiwan. So I would like to just bring up the concept, and which is also something I like to advocate, is the concept of so-called peace journalism. Actually, this is a textbook term. It's not new. And it's very easy for us to forget because we are pursuing good journalism. We want accuracy, we want fast speed, and we want our, exclusive headlines. And so the more conflict news we focus on, the better we will get attention from our, journalism colleagues and also from the society, which is really very rewarding. In terms of professionalism, working in journalism. I was also the correspondent in London. I understand that kind of feeling that when I get an exclusive news on some sort of conflictual news, then I really felt so excited. And we win, this news clicked and the audience attention. However, in my deep mind, when I was still working as a journalism, I kept asking myself, so what did I do to the world? Did I do anything good to the society by reporting and by revealing all this ugly side to my audience, to my readers? Can I do really actually something to help people bridging their gap and help them to just build more mutual understanding to each other instead of just pushing them to just deeper hatred, mutual hatred, and mutual misunderstanding? So, the same thing, that's when we are talking about the situation here. You know, when I read how Western media constantly talking about the possibility of war here in Taiwan, since last year, especially after the breakup of the Ukraine war, I just kind of feel so down in my mind because there actually should be a lot of different aspects that deserve our attention, that there are a lot of good people that make efforts, they try to understand each other, they try to just stand in each other's standing point in order to just bring us more contextual understanding of the whole conflict. But when we just focus on the tension between the two great powers, when we just focusing on how, like for example, Biden criticized Xi Jinping as dictators after Blinken visited Beijing last week. Yes, that we can make very good news about that. But what for? What does that make? What does that help the world for anything, to improve anything? So good journalism does not really equal peace journalism. And this particular timing, at this particular moment, I would like to advocate that we take peace journalism a greater place, rather than just simply writing an exciting, good story. And with peace journalism, we need to just have more contextual, more deeper understanding, try to put aside our own ideology, which is really very hard and very challenging to each other. But I have good hope for everyone here, and I really hope that journalism would help us to just get over all the differences among us. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, a room full of journalists are always going to want a good story, but I think it's always good to be reminded about the wider implications and responsibility of journalism to spread understanding. I'd like to take your questions. I've got many, many more if you don't have any, but I'm sure you've got lots of great ones. Yes, the lady in the second row. No, sorry, the lady at the front here in the second row.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Ting Liu with the Chief Foreign Affairs and Military Correspondent of TVBS News Taiwan. I actually have a question directed at Professor Wu, if you don't mind. Is that I'm just very curious, how would you actually reassess the pivot and what we call the strategic triangle in between the US, China, and Taiwan relations? And the window they mentioned earlier, what's the prediction? You know, how long will we have that safe window would be right now, given, we are sitting at a point less than a year after Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, you know, and basically how the geopolitical situation in between the three countries have changed so much.
Question clear enough to you? I think it's broadly to comment on the triangle of the three, what you expect to happen in this coming window of time.
I think it's a unique situation in that it seems to me that in all the three players, domestic politics would not play a negative role and would actually may contribute to some kind of rapprochement. But then this window is very narrow. It's going to be open for only several months. So if nothing can be achieved, then we would expect things will get much uglier because domestic competition, because the voters, they would want their leaders to be tough on the international stage. And this kind of things will happen in the future. And also because of the international structure is such that you do have a power transition between the United States and the PRC, and Taiwan is caught between the two. So it's a tensioned structure. And so you have to capture every window of opportunity when it arises. And then you have to resist the temptation to be extremely belligerent when your domestic politics is pushing you in that direction. It would be very difficult. It would test the maturity and wisdom of not only the political leaders, but also the citizens of the three countries. And I think journalism would play a great role in directing, influencing public opinions. In that sense, I would say I completely endorse Professor Xin's peace journalism, because really we don't need another war in East Asia following the Ukrainian scenario.
Okay, well, only a few months. Let's hope there aren't too many more balloons, dictator comments, other things to keep us busy. So I can see three hands. It's very hard for me to see because the light's over there. So I'm going to take the gentleman who's sitting just behind the first question, and then the gentleman in the white shirt. I mean, I saw another hand further back there.
Thank you all for your wonderful presentations. I'm going to be the lazy journalist and ask about the blue-green divide. And over the last 6 months or a year, we've had an addition of another color, which we could call white. And I'm wondering, with the upcoming presidential election, who do you think would be best suited to handle the situation in the Taiwan Strait? And you don't have to mention names, but maybe you could say what kind of policies they should pursue to ensure security in the Taiwan Strait.
Okay, let's take all three questions, and then we'll try and get some answers. We don't have so much time.
Thanks very much. I'm Will Glasgow from The Australian, and I want to follow Ting Ting's question and circle back to something Xiangwei said. You said, we, from your perspective, seen from Hong Kong, the Trump administration and decisions taken by his China advisors are pivotal to all this in 2016. Now, he wasn't elected until November 2016. didn't take office until January 2017. I mean, as I see the situation, in January 2016, there was the Taiwanese presidential election where President Tsai won, and she was inaugurated in May 2016. And it seems to me, going back to the strategic triangle, things were pretty destabilised despite the Obama administration being in, and frankly couldn't be more disinterested in conflict in Taiwan. I want to, so again, linking to the last question, how much do you see the cross-strait relations as being the big driver of the destabilisation, that is President Tsai's refusal to accept the 92 consensus, Beijing's response to her refusal, which has continued for 2 terms, and we're now on the cusp of potentially a 3rd term of that if President Lai wins?
Yeah, the question. And the one more at the back there.
Yeah, hello, just a quick one, maybe to summarise it. Obviously, it's war or not to go to war, but I wanted to get what is a genuine alternative to make the problem go away where Taiwan doesn't continue to live under this cloud in the future? What is it that you think China would accept that is not war that will make the problem go away, where this is not continuing into the future? What is it that you think that they would accept as an alternative?
Okay, so we've got 3 questions. Blue, green or white policies. Then the question is the extent to which President Tsai's election is actually responsible for the increasing tensions. And then basically 3, is there any answer to this? I'm going to let our Taiwanese colleagues comment on Taiwan politics to the extent they feel comfortable. Professor Shin, do you want to go first?
Okay, I will pick up the toughest one. So, next president, whom will suit the position best? Well, I think I will be heavily attacked if I really say the name on the internet. Well, at least my student will react very strongly. Okay, so instead of that, let me just do some trick. Instead of saying the name, I would like to just, I would just try to name the qualities of the president I think that would be really capable of handling the situation. So first, this person should have in his mind the real interest of Taiwan and people and the whole society, not his or her political career. Instead, he or she should think of the people, should think of the society and the people. So if this person actually adopted policies to serve the interests of his or her political party, and for him to secure more political resources, I think actually the society or the voters, they will have their own answers. That's the first thing. He got to be unselfish. And it's very difficult in democracy. We have to admit that, because in election, people actually run for their own interests, run for their own political parties. But in this particular situation, we need someone really unselfish. That's the first thing. Second one, integrity. This kind of character trait that has been taken as laughstick nowadays, because being integral, having integrity seems to be associated with the image of being a bumbler or being dumb or being inflexible or something. However, integrity is very important, especially when you are handling a situation so complex, just like this. Then you've got to be trustworthy. So I would actually think it's very important characters if this person really wants to be a responsible president. Okay, so that's the 2 I would like to highlight.
We've got so little time, so I'm going to ask Professor Wu to pick up one of those points that he's willing to take on.
I don't know whether I'm going to take one, because I'm going to use my magic formula again. And I think the leader of Taiwan should try to diffuse the risk by reducing the intention of the PRC to attack us, by increasing the capabilities of Taiwan to defend itself, and by showing to the PRC that it will be extremely costly for them to attack. So for the first dimension, I think the leader of Taiwan should dialogue with the other side and should not criticize anyone who wish to dialogue. It's not a betrayal of Taiwan's sovereignty or identity. It is a necessary step to prevent a war. And I don't think anything is morally higher than that goal for the people in Taiwan. So reduce the intention of the other side to attack us. You don't exclude the possibility of peaceful reunification, which is terribly important for the Chinese leaders. Secondly, but then you cannot just rely on that. You should increase your capability to defend yourself, and you should do all kinds of things, but then in a way that is not provocative. And the third thing is you have to use every opportunity that Taiwan has to increase our connections and relations with the outside world so that any attack on Taiwan will become extremely costly for the attacker because Taiwan is so intimately linked to the whole world. So I think the future leader of Taiwan would have to do these three things. And I'm going to vote for that one.
This person sounds like an absolute paragon. I want them in charge of Britain. They've got integrity. They can handle geopolitics. I want this person in charge. We're basically out of time, Jiang Wei. Can you solve the Taiwan issue in 10 seconds or less?
I can. I think, over the past few decades, it's always the Taiwan at the receiving end of a peace offer from Beijing. I hope the next leader of Taiwan could reverse this by offering a reunification proposal to Beijing. The ROC is longer than PRC. 三民主义 is longer than communism. So why can't a new leader of Taiwan offer Taiwan's peaceful proposal to Beijing? Taiwan is a more democratic society. Taiwan has a lot of things to offer to Beijing.
Fantastic.
That's my plan.
Jiang Wei, you're commissioned 900 words for the FT op-ed page on what Taiwan's plan should be. Thank you all. Thank you to our fantastic panel. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. Please enjoy your break. Thank you.
Hello, testing. In fact, you can't break now. There's going to be a very exciting session coming up. Bear with us for another 30 minutes. After that, there's the welcome reception where you can network and have drinks. But meanwhile, we have a very exciting part of the program, actually the last part of the proceedings today. We have the Editorial Leadership Award ceremony together with the Digital Media World Award ceremony. To make the announcement of the winners of the awards, may I welcome on stage President of One IFRA, Mr. Fernando Yaza.